A studio apartment has one obvious privacy problem. The bed is visible from almost everywhere, from the entry, from the kitchen, even from the sofa. So the first instinct feels obvious. Add a divider. But a divider can solve one problem and quietly create three more. It can block daylight, it can tighten the walkway, and it can make the entire room feel shorter. So before choosing a curtain, a shelf, or a screen, ask a better question. What should the divider block, and what must it leave open? Most people choose a divider first. A curtain they like, a shelf that looks useful, a screen that feels light. Then they try to find a place for it. That is backwards. Before you choose the object, decide what the boundary actually has to do. In this room, it does not need to hide the entire bed. It only needs to interrupt the strongest views, from the entry, from the kitchen, and from the sofa. But that same line cannot sit inside the walking path. The route from the door to the kitchen, from the living area to the desk, and from the bed back into the room still has to feel easy. And the window beside the bed is doing more than lighting the sleeping area. It is carrying daylight into the middle of the studio. A divider that is too tall, too wide, or too solid cuts that light off too early. So the right boundary is not the biggest one. It is the shortest line that blocks the view, while keeping the path and the daylight open. Place the boundary first. Choose the divider second. Once the boundary is fixed, the divider becomes much easier to judge. Same room, same position, 4 very different results. First, the solid wall. It gives the strongest privacy. The bed almost disappears from the living area, but the daylight disappears with it. The window beside the bed can no longer carry light into the center of the studio, and because the view stops so early, the whole room begins to feel shorter. A curtain is more flexible. Open, it almost disappears. Closed, privacy returns exactly when you need it. But a full sheet of fabric still reads like a wall. Soft does not always mean visually light. An open shelf creates a better middle ground. It separates the bed and adds useful storage. But the openings still allow daylight and depth to move through the room. Only if those openings stay open. Fill every compartment and the shelf becomes another wall. A slatted screen feels much lighter. It marks the sleeping zone without fully closing it. Daylight still passes through, and the studio still reads as one long space. The trade-off is less privacy and almost no storage. There is no perfect divider. The right choice depends on what matters most: privacy, storage, flexibility, or simply a clearer visual boundary. For this studio, the best solution should separate the bed without sealing off the room. Of the 4 options, the open shelf gives this room the best balance. Not the most privacy, not the most storage, but enough of both without cutting the studio in half. The placement comes first. The shelf begins behind the sofa, but it stops before the main passage. That keeps a clear route to the bed, the desk, and the window. Its height matters too. Around 4.5 feet is enough to screen the mattress from a seated view, but still low enough to keep the ceiling and window visually connected. And it should stay shallow, about a foot deep. Deep enough to hold a few useful things, but not so deep that it becomes another obstacle. Put the heavier storage near the bottom. Keep most of the upper openings empty. That gives the shelf a purpose without turning it opaque. From the entry, the bed is no longer the first thing you notice. From the living area, the shelf creates a middle layer instead of a hard stop. And from the bed, the rest of the studio still feels connected. That is the balance this room needs. Enough separation to calm the view, but not enough to break the room. A divider can look perfect from one angle and still fail the room. In a studio, it has to work from both sides. From the sofa, the bed should feel quieter, but the seating area still needs room to breathe. From the bed, privacy should increase without creating a box. The ceiling should still feel continuous. Daylight should still reach the middle of the studio, and the route to the desk and window should feel obvious. That is why the open end of the shelf matters. Extend it too far and every trip becomes a detour. From the entry, the living area should still be the first layer you notice. From the sleeping side, the back of the shelf still needs to look calm. Keep heavier storage low, keep the upper openings clear. Then test the divider from 3 places: the entry, the sofa, and the bed. At each one, check the view, the path, and the light. If all 3 still work, the shelf is doing its job. It gives the bed privacy without separating the studio from itself. Before you buy or build anything, run one simple 30-second test. Start at the entry. Can the divider quiet the bed without becoming the first thing you see? Then sit on the sofa. Does it soften the mattress, or does the shelf itself dominate the room? Now check from the bed. Privacy should increase, but the ceiling, daylight, and route back into the room should remain obvious. Next, walk the space. Door to kitchen, sofa to desk, bed back to the living area. If your body has to turn twice around the divider, the boundary is too long. Then watch the daylight. It should pass above, through, or around the divider. If the center of the studio goes flat, the divider is too tall, too wide, or too full. Finally, imagine the shelf completely empty. If it only works when styled, it is decoration, not a solution. A good divider still works as a structure. So check 4 things: the view, the path, the daylight, and the visual weight. If all 4 work from both sides, the divider passes. If one fails, change the line before you change the product. A good divider is not the one that hides the most, it is the one that changes what you notice first. The bed feels quieter, the living area feels clearer, but the daylight still moves, and the room still feels whole. That is the real test, not whether the divider creates another room, but whether it makes the original room work better. So divide the view, not the room. And before you build anything, test the sightline, the path, and the light.